The air inside St. Mary's Church in Savannah, Georgia, was thick with the kind of summer humidity that clung to your skin like a second layer. Rows of polished wooden pews gleamed under the glow of a massive chandelier, its light bouncing off stained glass windows in shades of crimson and gold. White lilies lined the aisle, their scent heavy and sweet, mixing with the faint tang of old wood and melted candle wax. It was the kind of place where old money whispered through every creak of the floorboards. And today, it was packed 200 guests fanning themselves with programs, waiting for a wedding that was supposed to be perfect. Lena Carter stood at the altar, her white gown hugging her frame, the lace catching the light just right. She'd spent hours getting ready, her deep brown skin glowing against the fabric, her hair swept up in a sleek bun that Tara had spent half the morning perfecting. She was supposed to feel like a queen. Instead, her stomach churned, a quiet unease she couldn't shake. Marcus Hayes, her groom, stood beside her, his navy suit crisp, his hand warm around hers. He flashed her a nervous smile, the kind that said we're in this together, and for a second, she almost believed it. Then Evelyn Hayes stood up. The rustle of her silk dress cut through the murmurs of the crowd like a knife. She rose from the front pew, all blonde hair and icy poise, clutching a small velvet box in her manicured hands. The officiant faltered mid-sentence, his Bible trembling slightly as he glanced her way. Every head in the church turned, a wave of silence crashing over the room. "This ring," Evelyn said, her voice smooth as glass but sharp enough to slice, "has been in the Hayes family for 3 generations. It's an heirloom, an emerald my grandmother wore until the day she died. Yesterday it went missing." She paused, letting the words sink in, her cool blue eyes locking onto Lena. "This morning, it was found in the hands of a maid who swears she saw the bride near it last night." A gasp rippled through the pews. Whispers erupted like wildfire. "No way. Did she really? I knew it." Lena's breath caught in her throat, her pulse hammering so loud she could barely hear the officiant's awkward cough. She turned to Marcus, waiting for him to laugh it off, to tell his mother to sit down, to say something, anything to shut this down. His grip on her hand tightened, but his eyes darted to Evelyn, then back to her, wide with something she couldn't name. "Marcus?" Lena's voice was barely a whisper, a plea wrapped in disbelief. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Lena, if you know anything about this, just say it. We can figure it out." The world tilted. Her chest felt like it had been cracked open, every hope she'd pinned on this day spilling out onto the altar. He didn't defend her. He didn't shout at his mother. He doubted her. In front of everyone, his family, her family, the cousins who'd flown in from Atlanta, the Savannah elite who'd never warmed up to her anyway he'd hesitated. Lena pulled her hand free, the heat of his touch burning worse than the stares now boring into her. Her fingers moved on instinct, tugging the engagement ring off her left hand. A diamond Marcus had slipped on her finger under a peach tree 2 summers ago. She set it down on the altar, the tiny clink echoing like a gunshot in the stunned silence. Tara, her maid of honor, let out a sharp, incredulous laugh from the sidelines. James, her dad, stood up from the front row, his broad shoulders tense, ready to charge. But Lena didn't wait. She turned, her gown dragging behind her, and walked down the aisle. The lilies blurred into streaks of white as she passed, the whispers swelling into a dull roar. She didn't look back, not at Marcus, not at Evelyn, not at the life she'd almost stepped into. The heavy oak doors loomed ahead, and when she pushed them open, the sticky Georgia heat hit her like a wave, pulling her out into the daylight. 12 hours earlier, Lena woke up in room 412 of the Marriott in downtown Atlanta, the sheer curtains doing a lousy job of blocking the morning sun. It streamed in, painting the room in a hazy gold glow that made the white wedding dress draped over a chair look like something out of a magazine. She lay there, staring at the ceiling, the hum of the AC buzzing faintly under the distant honks of traffic on Peachtree Street. Her heart thudded steady but heavy, like it was trying to tell her something she didn't want to hear. She'd pictured this morning 100 times, waking up with a grin, giggling with Tara over mimosas, feeling nothing but butterflies about Marcus waiting for her at St. Mary's. Instead, she felt off, like she was standing on the edge of something she couldn't see. She'd been brushing it off for months, the side eye from Evelyn at Thanksgiving, the way Marcus clammed up whenever his mom started in with her concerns. Today, though it was louder, impossible to ignore, a knock snapped her out of it. The door creaked open, and Tara Brooks poked her head in, balancing a styrofoam cup of coffee from the lobby. "Morning, bride," she chirped, her braids swinging as she bounced over to the bed. She plopped the cup on the nightstand and dropped onto the mattress, grinning. "You look like you're about to face a firing squad, not walk down the aisle. What's up?" Lena forced a smile, sitting up and tucking a stray curl behind her ear. "Just nerves, I guess. Big day." Tara cocked her head, studying her with those sharp brown eyes that always saw too much. Normal to feel jittery, sure. But you love Marcus, right? That's the deal?" "Yeah," Lena said, the word slipping out like a reflex. "Of course." But as soon as she said it, a tiny voice in her head whispered, "Then why's it feel like this?" She shoved it down, reaching for the coffee instead. The warmth seeped into her palms, grounding her as Tara launched into a rundown of the day: hair at 10, makeup at 11, the drive to Savannah by noon. The room was already a mess of bridal chaos. A curling iron plugged in by the sink, a bag of makeup spilling onto the dresser, the dress taking up half the space like it owned the place. Tara hauled her up, chattering about how Lena was gonna knock Marcus dead when he saw her. "That man's been texting me all week, asking if you're still into this." Dude's whipped. Lena laughed, a real one this time, and let Tara drag her into the whirlwind. She slipped into the gown an hour later, the silk cool against her skin, the fit so perfect it made her catch her breath in the mirror. She looked like a bride, elegant, striking, ready, but underneath, that gnawing feeling wouldn't quit. Her phone buzzed on the dresser, and she grabbed it, seeing Marcus's name pop up with a voice message. "Hey, babe," his voice crackled through, low and soft like it always was when he was nervous. "Can't wait to see you. Today's gonna be perfect. Love you." She closed her eyes, letting his words wrap around her like a blanket. She wanted to believe them. She needed to. Downstairs, her mom, Diane, was fussing with her veil while her dad, James, leaned against the wall in his rented tux, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. "You good, baby girl?" he asked, his voice gruff but warm. "Yeah, Daddy," she lied, smoothing her dress. "Just ready to get this show on the road." Diane adjusted the veil, her lips pursed like she was holding something back. "That Evelyn woman's been calling all morning about the flowers. Lord knows what she'll pull next." Lena rolled her eyes. "She'll behave. This Marcus's day too." James snorted. "That woman don't know the meaning of behave. Watch yourself down there, Lena." She waved it off, but his words stuck with her as they piled into the car, a rented Escalade with Tara riding shotgun, blasting Beyoncé to keep the vibes up. The drive to Savannah was a blur of green pines and humid air whipping through the cracked windows, the city skyline fading into marshlands and old oaks draped in Spanish moss. By the time they hit the cobblestone streets near St. Mary's, Lena's palms were sweaty, and it wasn't just the heat. Outside the church, Tara pulled her into a quick hug, her perfume sharp and citrusy. "You got this, girl. Let's make 'em all jealous." Lena nodded, her throat tight, and stepped out onto the steps. The doors loomed ahead, the weight of the day pressing down like a storm about to break. She didn't know it yet, but she was walking into more than a wedding. She was walking into a reckoning. Phew, what a start. Things are already heating up, and we're just getting going. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss what's next. Trust me, you won't see it coming. Where you watching from? Drop it in the comments below. The morning sun was barely up, but the humidity in Atlanta was already sticking to everything like a bad habit. Lena Carter sat on the edge of the hotel bed at the Marriott, her bare feet pressed against the scratchy carpet, the air conditioner humming a losing battle against the Georgia heat. The white wedding dress hung over a chair by the window, catching the first rays of light like it was daring her to put it on. She rubbed her eyes, trying to shake the fog in her head. She'd barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Marcus's smile, then Evelyn's pinched lips, like a movie stuck on repeat. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, cutting through the quiet. She grabbed it, half expecting another sappy text from Marcus, but it was a voice message. His name glowed on the screen, and she hit play, holding the phone to her ear. "Hey, babe," Marcus's voice came through, warm and a little shaky, like he just rolled out of bed too. "I'm up way too early thinking about you. Can't wait to see you walking down that aisle. Today's gonna be perfect. Lena. Love you." The message ended with a soft click, and she let the phone drop into her lap, staring at it. That voice used to make her melt 2 years of late-night calls and sweet nothings under Savannah stars. Now it just made her chest ache in a way she couldn't pin down. The door swung open before she could overthink it, and Tara Brooks burst in, balancing a styrofoam cup of coffee and a bag of donuts from the lobby. "Rise and shine, bride," she sang, kicking the door shut with her heel. Her braids were pulled back in a messy bun, and she was still in her pajama shorts, but her grin was wide enough to light the room. "Got you some fuel. You're gonna need it to deal with all those fancy Savannah folks today." Lena managed a laugh, taking the coffee. "Thanks, T. You're a lifesaver." Tara flopped onto the bed, snagging a donut for herself. "So, scale of 1 to 10, how freaked out are you right now? 'Cause you look like you're about to bolt." 5, Lena lied, sipping the coffee. It was bitter, cheap hotel stuff, but it warmed her up. Just, wedding jitters. Tara raised an eyebrow, chewing thoughtfully. "Jitters don't make you stare at your dress like it's gonna bite you. Spill it, what's eating you?" Lena sighed, setting the cup down. "I don't know, okay? The stupid. Marcus is great, the wedding set, but I keep feeling like something's off. Like I'm missing a piece of the puzzle." Tara leaned back on her elbows, studying her. "You mean Evelyn? 'Cause that woman's been throwing shade since day one. Remember Thanksgiving? She asked if your mom's cornbread was store-bought, like she didn't see the pan in the oven." Lena snorted, the memory stinging a little. "Yeah, she's a piece of work. But Marcus says she'll come around." "Sure, when hell freezes over," Tara muttered, then sat up. "Look, you're marrying him, not her. Don't let her mess with your head. Now come on, we've got to schedule hair, makeup, then we're hauling ass to Savannah. You're gonna slay this." Across town in Savannah, Marcus Hayes sat at the dining table in his family's sprawling Victorian mansion. The kind of place that screamed old money with its ivy-covered walls and wraparound porch. The table was set with china nobody used, and the smell of bacon hung in the air, courtesy of the cook who'd been with the Hayes since Marcus was a kid. He was half-dressed, white shirt unbuttoned, navy suit jacket hanging on a chair, picking at a plate of eggs he didn't want. Evelyn Hayes sat at the head of the table, her blonde hair pinned up like she was about to host a garden party, not watch her son get married. She sipped her tea, her pinky raised just so, her sharp blue eyes flicking to Marcus every few seconds. Henry Hayes, his dad, sat across from him, buried in the morning paper, grunting at the headlines like he always did. The silence was thick, the kind that made Marcus's skin itch. "You're quiet this morning," Evelyn said finally, setting her cup down with a delicate clink. "Second thoughts?" Marcus's fork froze halfway to his mouth. "No, Mom. Just thinking about the day." She tilted her head, her smile thin. "Good. Because it's a big one. And you could still change your mind. There's time." He clenched his jaw, dropping the fork. "I'm not changing my mind. I love Lena. We've been over this." Henry rustled his paper but didn't look up. "Your mother's just saying what we've all been thinking, son. She's a nice girl, but she's not exactly one of us." Marcus rubbed his temples, the headache he'd been fighting all morning kicking in. "She doesn't have to be one of us. She's the one I want." Evelyn's lips pursed, but she didn't push it, not yet. She just watched him, her fingers tapping lightly against the table, like she was biding her time. Back in Atlanta, the Escalade rolled out of the Marriott parking lot by noon, the sun high and brutal. Tara cranked the AC and blasted Single Ladies through the speakers, singing off key while Lena's mom, Diane, sat in the back, fussing with a cooler of snacks. James was behind the wheel, his big hands steady on the steering, his tux already wrinkled from the heat. "You sure about this boy, Lena?" Diane asked, handing her a bottle of water. "I still think about that first dinner with his folks." Evelyn looked at me like I'd crawled out of a swamp. Lena twisted the cap off, smirking. She's just stuck up, mama. Marcus isn't like that. James glanced at her in the rearview mirror, his deep voice rumbling. He better not be, 'cause I ain't driving 2 hours for nothing. Tara laughed, turning the music down. Oh, he's whipped, Mr. Carter. Been texting me all week, asking if Lena's still in. Dude's head over heels. The drive stretched on, the city giving way to flat highways lined with pines and billboards for peach stands. Lena leaned her head against the window, watching the world blur by, Marcus's voice message replaying in her mind. She wanted to hold onto that warmth, but Diane's words kept creeping in Evelyn's cold stares. The way she'd asked about Lena's job like it was a hobby, not a career. By the time they hit Savannah's cobblestone streets, her stomach was a knot she couldn't untie. St. Mary's loomed ahead when they pulled up, its steeple cutting into the hazy sky. The parking lot was already full BMWs and Lexuses from the Hayes side, a few beat-up Hondas from Lena's crew. Guests milled around, fanning themselves with programs, the air buzzing with chatter. Lena stepped out, the heat hitting her like a wall, her heels sinking into the gravel. Tara adjusted her veil, muttering, "Showtime, girl." Inside the bridal suite, a cramped room off the main hall, Lena stood in front of a cracked mirror, smoothing her gown. The silk felt heavier now, like it was pressing her down. Tara was digging through a makeup bag when the door creaked open, and Evelyn Hayes stepped in, her heels clicking on the hardwood. Lena stiffened, turning to face her. Evelyn's smile was all teeth, no warmth, her eyes raking over the gown like she was pricing it. "You clean up nice," she said, her Savannah drawl dripping with something Lena couldn't quite place. "Quite a statement, that dress." "Thanks," Lena said, keeping her voice even. "Took a while to pick it." Evelyn tilted her head, stepping closer, her perfume sharp and expensive. "I'm sure it did. You're stepping into a big day, Lena. A big family. You sure you're ready for that?" Lena's fingers curled at her sides, but she held Evelyn's gaze. "I'm ready for Marcus. That's what matters." Evelyn's smile tightened, her eyes narrowing just enough to send a chill down Lena's spine. "We'll see," she said, then turned on her heel and glided out, leaving the air colder than before. Tara let out a low whistle, shaking her head. "That woman's got it out for you, girl. Watch your back." Lena exhaled, turning back to the mirror. Her reflection stared back, beautiful, composed, but underneath, the knot in her stomach twisted tighter. She didn't know it yet, but Tara was right. Evelyn wasn't just throwing shade, she was setting a trap. Outside, the organ started up, a slow, heavy hum that filled the church. Lena took a deep breath, linking arms with James as they stepped toward the doors. The crowd hushed, all eyes turning her way. She felt Marcus waiting at the end of that aisle, felt the weight of every stare, every whisper. She told herself it was just nerves. She told herself it'd be fine. She couldn't have been more wrong. The organ swelled inside St. Mary's, its deep notes vibrating through the polished wooden pews as Lena Carter stood at the back of the aisle, her arm hooked through her dad's. James Carter stood tall beside her, his rented tux stretched tight across his broad shoulders, his jaw set like he was ready to take on anyone who looked at her wrong. The doors creaked open, and a wall of humid air rushed in, carrying the scent of lilies and wax from the candles flickering along the walls. 200 pairs of eyes turned her way, a mix of curiosity and judgment buzzing beneath the music. Lena's gown trailed behind her, the white silk catching the light from the stained glass windows, reds and blues splashing across her like a warning she didn't see. She forced a smile, her heart pounding against her ribs as she locked eyes with Marcus Hayes at the altar. He looked sharp in his navy suit, his dark hair slicked back, a grin breaking through the nerves on his face. For a second, she let herself believe it. This is it. This is us, and the knot in her stomach loosened just enough to keep her moving. The walk felt endless. Whispers followed her like shadows. "She's stunning. Bold dress for a Hayes wedding. Wonder what Evelyn thinks." She kept her chin up, focusing on Marcus, on the promise in his eyes. James squeezed her arm as they reached the front, whispering, "You're my girl, Lena. Always." She nodded, stepping up beside Marcus, his hand slipping into hers like it belonged there. The officiant, a wiry guy with glasses perched on his nose, cleared his throat and started in. "We're gathered here today to join two souls in love," he said, his voice bouncing off the high ceiling. Lena tried to listen, to lose herself in the moment, but the weight of the room pressed down the Hayes side in their muted suits and pearls, her people in brighter colors, shifting uncomfortably under the stairs. Evelyn sat front and center, her blonde hair a perfect crown, her face unreadable but stiff, like she was holding something back. Marcus turned to her for the vows, his grip tightening. "Lena, from the day I met you, I knew you were different. You're strong, you're real, and you make me better. I promise to love you, to stand by you, through everything, good days, bad days, all of it." His voice cracked a little, and her chest warmed. She opened her mouth to reply, but then the doors at the back groaned open again. Evelyn stood. The room froze. She moved with the grace of someone who'd spent a lifetime commanding attention, her silk dress rustling as she held up a small velvet box. The officiant stammered, clutching his Bible like a lifeline. "Mrs. Hayes, we're in the middle of... This can't wait." Evelyn cut in, her voice slicing through the air. She flipped the box open, revealing an emerald ring that glinted under the chandelier. "This belonged to my grandmother. It's been in our family for decades. Yesterday, it vanished from my jewelry box. This morning, our maid found it, said she saw Lena near it last night." The church erupted. Gasps, murmurs, a few sharp what?'s from the back. Lena's stomach dropped, her breath catching like she'd been sucker punched. She turned to Marcus, her eyes wide, waiting for him to shut it down. He'd been with her last night dinner at her hotel, laughing over takeout wings and Coke. He knew she hadn't been anywhere near Evelyn's stuff. "Marcus," she hissed, her voice trembling. "Say something." He blinked, his mouth opening then closing, his hand twitching in hers. "Lena, I did you. If you know anything, just tell me. We can fix this." The words hit her like a slap. Her vision blurred, the lilies and candles fading into a haze. He didn't say, "That's ridiculous." He didn't say, "Mom, stop." He said, "Tell me," like there was even a chance she'd done it, like he didn't trust her. Tara, standing off to the side in her bridesmaid dress, let out a loud, "Oh, hell no," stepping forward before Lena could process it. "Fix this?" Tara snapped, her voice carrying over the whispers. "Your mom's out here accusing her of stealing, and you're just gonna stand there like a punk? Are you serious, Marcus?" Evelyn didn't flinch, her gaze locked on Lena. "I'm not accusing anyone outright," she said, smooth as butter. "But trust is everything in a marriage. We should clear this up, don't you think?" James was on his feet now, his deep voice booming. "Clear what up? You're standing here slandering my daughter in front of God and everybody. What's your game, lady?" Evelyn's lips twitched, a flicker of a smile. "I just want the truth, Mr. Carter. No mother wants doubt hanging over her son's big day." "Doubt?" James barked, stepping closer. "You're the one stirring this pot. You got proof, or you just flapping your gums?" Lena's head spun, the noise crashing around her, her dad's fury, Tara's outrage, the guests whispering like vultures circling. She looked at Marcus, waiting, praying he'd step up. His face was pale, his jaw tight, but he just stood there, caught between her and his mother, like a deer in headlights. "Marcus," she said, louder this time, her voice cutting through the chaos. "You know I didn't do this. Tell her." He swallowed, running a hand through his hair. "I was just shocked, Lena. Let's talk it out. Okay? We can." "No," she said, the word sharp and final. She yanked her hand from his, her fingers trembling as she reached for the engagement ring. The diamond glinted as she tugged it off, the metal cold against her skin. She set it on the altar with a soft clink, the sound echoing louder than it should have. A collective gasp rolled through the pews. Someone in the back muttered, "Oh, snap." "Lena, wait," Marcus started, his voice cracking, but she was already moving. She turned, her gown swishing as she stepped down from the altar, the silk dragging across the floor. Tara fell in beside her, muttering, "Good riddance," under her breath. James followed, his heavy footsteps a steady rhythm behind her. Diane right on his heels, her face tight with silent rage. The aisle stretched out, the lilies blurring into white streaks, the whispers swelling into a roar. She didn't stop, didn't look back, just pushed through the oak doors and out into the blazing Savannah sun. The steps outside St. Mary's were stained with years of rain and wear, and Lena's heels clicked against them as she stopped, sucking in a breath of sticky air. The gown clung to her legs, the veil tangling in the breeze. Tara grabbed her arm, steadying her, her eyes blazing. "You okay, girl? 'Cause I'm about 2 seconds from going back in there and decking somebody." Lena nodded, but she wasn't sure. Her chest felt hollow, her hands shaking as she stared out at the cobblestone street. Guests started spilling out behind them, some craning their necks, others pretending not to stare. Then she heard him. "Lena." Marcus's voice cut through the chatter, desperate and raw. He stumbled down the steps, his tie loose, his face flushed. "Please just wait. I didn't know she was gonna do that, I swear. I had no idea." She turned, slow, her eyes meeting his. He looked wrecked, his hands reaching out like he could pull her back. "You didn't know," she said, her voice low, steady despite the storm inside her. "But you didn't stop her either." "I was in shock," he pleaded, stepping closer. "I didn't mean it like that, I just wanted to." "To what?" She cut in, her tone sharp enough to make him flinch. "To make sure I wasn't lying? In front of everybody, Marcus? You didn't even try." He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. James stepped up beside her, his voice a growl. "You've said enough, boy. Step off." Marcus's shoulders slumped. His eyes locked on Lena, begging. "I love you. Please don't do this." She looked at him, the man she'd loved for 2 years, the one she'd built a future with, in her head, and felt something snap. "You should have thought about that before you let me walk out," she said, then turned away. Tara slipped an arm through hers, guiding her down the steps, James and Diane flanking them like a shield. The crowd parted, the whispers fading into the hum of the city as they headed for the Escalade. Lena slid into the back seat, the leather hot against her skin, and stared out the window as Savannah blurred past. She'd walked in a bride. She was leaving something else entirely. Talk about a blow-up. Lena's out, but is this really the end? Subscribe now to find out what's next. You won't believe where this is going. Where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, I want to hear from you. The Blue Heron Cafe sat tucked off a quiet street in Charleston, South Carolina, its faded blue awning flapping lazily in the breeze. It was the kind of place locals loved, worn wooden tables, the smell of fresh ground coffee mixing with the salty tang of the nearby harbor, and a jukebox in the corner that hadn't worked since the 90s. Lena Carter slumped into a corner booth, her suitcase shoved under the table, the white wedding gown still stuffed inside like a ghost she couldn't shake. She'd been in Charleston 3 days, crashing at a cheap motel after ditching Atlanta, trying to outrun the mess she'd left behind in Savannah. The cafe was half empty, just a few regulars nursing mugs and flipping through newspapers. Lena stared at her untouched iced coffee, condensation dripping onto the table, her reflection a blurry smudge in the glass. She hadn't cried yet, not in the car with Tara, not when her mom hugged her tight that night, not even when she deleted Marcus's last text. "I'm sorry, Lena. Please talk to me." She kept waiting for the tears, but all she felt was numb, like she'd hollowed out somewhere between St. Mary's and here. Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of it. Tara's name lit up the screen, and Lena answered, propping it against her ear. "Hey T, girl, where you at?" Tara's voice crackled through, loud and urgent. "I've been calling you all morning. You good?" "Yeah," Lena lied, tracing a finger through the water ring on the table. "Just laying low in Charleston. Needed some air." "Air? Huh?" Tara snorted. "Well, buckle up, 'cause I've got news." "You sitting down?" Lena frowned, sitting up straighter. "I'm in a booth. What's up?" Tara took a deep breath, the kind she always did before dropping a bomb. "So, I was over at my cousin's place last night. She works with Marcus's sister, Jenna. Guess what Jenna let slip? Evelyn made it up. That ring never went missing. She told the maid to plant it and say she saw you, just to see if Marcus would stick by you or crack." Lena's hand froze mid-air, the words sinking in slow, then fast, like a punch she didn't see coming. Wait, what? You heard me, Tara said, her voice rising. That which set you up? Lena. It was a test and Marcus flunked it big time. Jenna said Evelyn's been bragging about it to her bridge club buddies. Oh. I had to make sure she wasn't right for my boy. Can you believe that? The cafe spun a little, the hum of the AC fading into a dull roar in her ears. Lena leaned back against the booth, her breath shallow. She'd spent days replaying that moment in the church, Evelyn's smug face, Marcus's hesitation, the way she'd walked out feeling like the guilty one. And now this, it wasn't even real. It was a game, a twisted power play, and she'd been the pawn. Lena? Tara's voice cut through. You still there? Yeah, she managed, her throat tight. I don't even know what to say. Say you're pissed. Tara snapped. Say you're gonna march back to Savannah and shove that ring down Evelyn's throat. I'll drive you myself. Lena let out a shaky laugh, the first real one in days. Naughty. She's not worth it. Tara huffed. Well, somebody needs to pay. What about Marcus? He's been blowing up my phone too, whining about how he messed up. Let him whine, Lena said, her voice hardening. He made his choice. She hung up after a few more minutes of Tara's ranting, promising to call later. The iced coffee sat there, melting into a puddle, but something shifted inside her. It wasn't anger, not yet, but a flicker of relief. She hadn't been wrong. She hadn't been crazy to walk away. Evelyn's trap had exposed Marcus for what he was, a man who'd fold when it mattered most. The bell above the cafe door jingled, and Lena glanced up, her heart stopping for a beat. Marcus Hayes stepped inside, his navy blazer rumpled, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on her. He looked like hell, dark circles under his eyes, hair a mess, like he hadn't slept since she'd left him at St. Mary's. He hesitated, then walked over, his boots scuffing the hardwood. Lena, he said, his voice rough. Can I sit? She didn't answer, just stared at him, her fingers curling around the edge of the table. He took it as a yes, sliding into the booth across from her, his hands fidgeting on the tabletop. How'd you find me? She asked, her tone flat. Tara slipped up yesterday, mentioned Charleston. I drove all night. He leaned forward, his eyes pleading. I had to see you. I've been losing my mind. Lena. She crossed her arms, leaning back. Good for you. He winced, running a hand through his hair. I know I screwed up. I should have stopped her. I should have told Mom to shove it right there in the church. I was just, blindsided. I didn't think straight. Didn't think straight, she echoed, her voice low, dangerous. You stood there and asked me to explain myself, Marcus, like I was some thief, in front of everybody. I didn't mean it like that, he said, his voice rising. I was trying to fix it. I thought if we talked it out. There was nothing to talk out. She cut in, her words sharp. You either trusted me or you didn't. And you didn't. He slumped, his shoulders sagging. I do trust you. I love you, Lena. That's why I'm here. I talked to Mom. She admitted it was a setup. She's crazy. Okay? I told her she's out of line, that I'm done letting her run my life. Lena's breath hitched, Tara's words ringing in her head. So he knew it was a lie, knew his mom had orchestrated the whole thing. Part of her wanted to believe him, to grab onto that I'm done and run with it. But then she saw his face again, pale, hesitant, standing at that altar while she broke inside. Too late, she said, quiet but firm. You don't get to fix this after the fact. Lena, please, he begged, reaching for her hand. She pulled back, her chair scraping the floor. I was weak, okay? I admit it. But I'm here now. I'll fight for you. We can still make this work. She stood, grabbing her suitcase, the weight of it grounding her. You don't get it, Marcus. I shouldn't have had to fight for you to fight for me. I needed you then, not now. His face crumpled, his hands dropping to the table. I love you, he whispered, like it could change anything. You loved me wrong, she said, her voice steady despite the ache in her chest. She turned, pushing through the cafe door, the bell jingling behind her as she stepped into the sunlight. The Charleston air hit her like a wave, salty, warm, alive. She walked down the street, suitcase bumping against her leg, the harbor glinting in the distance. Gulls wheeled overhead, their cries sharp against the hum of the city waking up. She didn't know where she was going, not back to Atlanta. Not yet, but for the first time in days, her steps felt lighter. Marcus's words echoed in her head, but they didn't pull her back. Tara was right, Evelyn had set the trap, but Marcus had walked right into it, dragging her down with him. Knowing it was a lie didn't erase the betrayal, it just made it clearer. She'd spent 2 years trying to fit into his world, dodging Evelyn's jabs, convincing herself love would be enough. But love wasn't supposed to feel like a test she had to pass. She stopped at a crosswalk, the breeze tugging at her hair, and pulled out her phone. She scrolled to Marcus's contact, one tap, and he'd be blocked. Her thumb hovered, then pressed. The screen blinked, and he was gone. She exhaled, long and slow, like she'd been holding her breath since Savannah. The ocean stretched out ahead, blue and endless, whispering something she couldn't quite hear yet. She adjusted her grip on the suitcase and kept walking, the weight of the gown inside it fading with every step. The sun was dipping low over Tybee Island, painting the sky in streaks of orange and pink that melted into the horizon. Lena Carter stood barefoot on the beach, the sand cool and gritty between her toes, the Atlantic lapping at her ankles with a steady, soothing rhythm. She'd been on the island for 3 weeks, renting a little clapboard cottage just off the main drag, a place with peeling paint, a creaky porch, and a view of the ocean that made her breath catch every morning. Her suitcase sat unpacked in the corner, the wedding gown still crumpled inside like a memory she wasn't ready to face. The air smelled of salt and seaweed, a far cry from the sticky heat of Savannah or the coffee-scented haze of Charleston. Out here, the world felt bigger, quieter, like it was giving her room to figure out who she was without all the noise. She'd left her phone on silent most days, ignoring the flood of texts from Marcus that had trickled to a stop after she'd blocked him. Tara checked in every few days, her voice a lifeline. You still breathing out there, girl? And her parents had sent a care package of Diane's pecan pie and a note from James. Take your time, baby girl. We're proud. Lena adjusted the notebook in her hands, its pages already curling from the damp air. She'd started writing again, something she hadn't done since before the wedding scribbles about the waves, the gulls, the way the light hit the water at dawn. It wasn't much, but it felt like hers, a piece of herself she was stitching back together. She settled onto a driftwood log, the rough bark biting into her legs, and flipped to a blank page, the pen hovering over it. You're out here a lot, a voice said, pulling her from her thoughts. She looked up, startled, to see a guy standing a few feet away, a camera dangling from a worn leather strap around his neck. He was tall, with sun-bleached hair and a tan that said he lived more outside than in, his easy grin softening the interruption. Yeah, Lena said, closing the notebook. It's peaceful. He nodded, squinting out at the ocean. Name's Sam. I've seen you around, thought you might be a writer or something, always with that book. Lena, she offered, a small smile tugging at her lips. Not a writer exactly, just thinking on paper. Best kind of thinking, he said, lifting the camera. I do mine through this. Keeps the good stuff from slipping away. He snapped a quick shot of the horizon, the shutter clicking softly, then glanced at her. Mind if I sit? She shrugged, scooting over on the log. Free beach. Sam dropped down beside her, resting the camera in his lap. So what brings you to Tybee? You don't strike me as a tourist. She hesitated, the question poking at a wound still raw. Needed a break, she said finally. Life got loud back home. He nodded like he got it without needing details. This place is good for that. Washes the loud right out of you. They sat in silence for a bit, the waves crashing in a steady beat, the sky darkening as the last of the sun slipped away. Sam didn't push, didn't pry, just fiddled with his camera settings, letting her breathe. It was the first time in weeks she'd talked to someone new without feeling like she had to explain herself. Why pictures? She asked after a while, nodding at the camera. He grinned, tapping the lens. Memory's tricky. Sometimes we let the bad stuff take over, blur out the good. This keeps what I want to hold on to: sunsets, waves, the way the light hits just right. Lena looked out at the water, his words sinking in. She'd been carrying the bad for weeks. Marcus's hesitation, Evelyn's smug face, the weight of that church. Maybe she'd been letting it drown out the good the way Tara had her back. Her dad's quiet strength, her own courage to walk away. You ever forget the bad on purpose? She asked, her voice softer. Sam tilted his head, thoughtful. Sometimes. But it's not about forgetting, it's about choosing what's worth keeping. She nodded, her fingers tightening around the notebook. He didn't ask what she meant, just stood, brushing sand off his jeans. See you around, Lena. Keep writing. See you, she said, watching him head down the beach, his silhouette fading into the dusk. That night she couldn't sleep. The cottage creaked with every gust off the ocean. The sound seeping into her dreams, Marcus's voice, Evelyn's cold stare, the ring hitting the altar. She woke up sweaty, the sheets tangled around her legs, and stumbled out to the porch in her tank top and shorts, the air cool against her skin. The waves roared in the dark, a steady pulse that pulled her back to Sam's words. Choosing what's worth keeping. She grabbed the suitcase from the corner, dragging it outside. The zipper stuck, but she yanked it open, pulling out the wedding gown. It spilled onto the porch in a heap of white silk, the lace glinting in the moonlight. She stared at it, her chest tight, not with sadness, but with something else. Clarity, maybe. She'd bought that dress thinking it was the start of something, love, a future, a family. But it wasn't. It was a weight, a symbol of a life she'd tried to force herself into, a life where she'd had to prove she was enough. She didn't want it anymore. Lena scooped it up, the fabric cool and slippery in her hands, and walked down to the beach. The tide was coming in, the water dark and endless. She waded in up to her knees, the waves tugging at her legs, and held the gown out. For a second, she hesitated, then let go. The ocean took it, swirling it into the foam, a flash of white disappearing into the black. She stood there, the salt stinging her eyes, but she didn't cry. She smiled. Back on the porch, she picked up the notebook and started writing, not about Marcus, not about the wedding, but about the waves, about the way they carried things away and brought new things back. She wrote about herself, Lena, not the bride, not the daughter-in-law who never fit, just Lena. The pen moved fast, the words spilling out like they'd been waiting. A month later, she was still on Tybee. The cottage felt like home now, the porch cluttered with shells she'd collected, the notebook nearly full. She'd gone kayaking with Sam one afternoon, laughing when he tipped over trying to get a shot of a pelican, and she'd started helping out at the local diner, pouring coffee for fishermen and tourists. It wasn't a plan, it was just living, and it felt good. One morning, she walked down to the pier, the sun climbing over the water, a cheap silver ring from a flea market glinting on her finger, a gift to herself, not a promise from anyone else. She'd kept the old engagement ring from Marcus in her pocket for weeks, a last tether she hadn't cut. Now she pulled it out, the diamond catching the light one last time. She didn't need it anymore. She tossed it into the waves, watching it sink, a tiny ripple fading into nothing. The ocean didn't care about promises broken or hearts bruised, it just kept moving. And so would she. Lena pulled out her notebook, flipping to a fresh page, and wrote, I'm Lena Carter, and I'm free not because I ran, but because I chose me. She closed it, the wind tugging at her hair, and looked out at the horizon. Whatever came next, she'd meet it on her terms. And that's it, Lena's story ends with a new beginning. What did you think? Subscribe to catch more tales like this, and let me know in the comments what's one thing you'd let the waves take away. Thanks for sticking with me.